Hi, I'm Sayaka Tora from Humantel. And for those of you who don't know, Humantel is a cutting edge research and training company. And we specialize in leveraging the art and science of reading people. It's my pleasure to be here with my friend Derya, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's been practicing for over 10 years. And we met almost 20 years ago in the Bay Area through the sport of judo, but we recently reconnected through LinkedIn. And we decided to meet up today to talk about the importance of mental health and other important topics such as anxiety and relationships. So I really appreciate you making the time today, Daria, and thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Sayaka. It is such a pleasure to be here and to have this platform to talk a little bit in depth about some of these subjects that have been so relevant to many of us, especially since the pandemic. So really appreciate you also facilitating this and looking forward to some of our conversations.
Yeah, I think the last several years has been super challenging for so many people, myself included. And it really has revealed the importance of discussing mental health issues and various emotional states. So, as we open this discussion from a therapist perspective, how has the pandemic affected anxiety and anxiety management in particular?
Um, yeah, I think that's a very significant question. I'm very thankful that you brought forward kind of that connection between the pandemic and anxiety. And I think if we were to just talk about anxiety in general, the point that I would really want to highlight before getting into the specifics is understanding anxiety. And understanding anxiety in essence is understanding disruptions and understanding change. And so I think anxiety essentially manifests itself in psychological and somatic expressions of worry and fear, essentially over situations where we feel that we don't have a whole lot of agency or influence over. And in that way, the pandemic has revealed that in so many different dimensions of our lives because it has created disruption and change in many of our routines that helped us feel anchored and grounded. And those are very, very significant to helping us feel a sense of stability in our lives. When we have stability, when we have a sense of routine in our lives, it is only then that we can feel, in essence, motivated and inspired to go above and beyond our basic survival needs, right? When we feel that, oh, we know what time in the day we're going to wake up, we know where we're going to go to work, we know what we're going to come home to at the end of a difficult day. Only then can we begin to explore the different dimensions of our life, which might be hobbies, extracurriculars, social engagements, and in essence all of those structures have been shaken up because the pandemic has forced us to stay home. It's changed, right? Whether we go to the office or not, it's changed the relational dynamics within our home. And so, in essence, it really has taken us away from feeling empowered in what our day to day experiences look like. So I think just to answer your question, as a basic principle, right? Anxiety manifests itself in disruption and change, and the pandemic has essentially invited that in all the main parts, all the main domains in our life.
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about disruption and change, I think everybody can relate to that because, as we all know, during the pandemic in different regions of the country were responding differently. But here in the Bay Area, we went through a pretty strict lockdown that was originally like 2 weeks to slow the spread, but became several months where we had our daily routines and things that we were used to. Kids were not going to school. Everybody was at home. We weren't able to do the extracurriculars that we normally did. So, can you speak to how those disruptions really is critical to understanding anxiety and how disruptions affect anxiety?
I think if we are to understand anxiety, it's also important to understand what not having anxiety looks like, right? And not having anxiety, oftentimes, as I referred to as earlier, involves safety, involves a sense of psychological safety. And we feel psychologically safe when we have rhythms in place in our lives that allow us to know, right, that allow us to feel anchored in our day to day, in our week to week. And when those are taken away, it's very common psychologically for us to feel disoriented. And we can just imagine, let's say on a daily basis, we have a rhythm where, we can anticipate we're going to be in meetings 12 to 4 p.m., but then suddenly something happens, right, that creates a shift in that plan, a new errand, a new task is brought forward that takes us away from that priority. And so we feel kind of in a rush immediately. Our natural response is to go into survival mode and to take care of that task at hand. And so we feel disoriented.
Mhm.
Uh, and I like the word disruption that we keep bringing forward, because even though that example is a common disruption and it has somewhat of a negative connotation, there are also good disruptions that I think are difficult. And what I mean by good disruptions is something that we all probably can relate to because it's a part of our natural curriculum as people. In different developmental stages of our lives, we make different decisions that invite change, right? And that can look like getting married, that can look like having a child, that can look like moving to a new community, that can look like being promoted at work to a role that you're super excited about. So, of course, when we think about all that sounds wonderful. That's great. Those are all things that we probably wanted and worked really hard to establish in our lives. And fundamentally, it's change, right? When you get married, you have to now live with someone that perhaps you didn't live with. So then there is a new routine that you have to adapt to. And what scientists often say, what research shows is it takes on average 1 to 3 months in order for us to adapt to something new. And what that means is 1 to 3 months often refers to change that we ourselves have invited. So this is what we call intrinsic motivations, right? Intrinsic motivators. Whereas if something externally happened, there's an external factor that influences our rhythm, then it takes on average 4 to 8 months, actually. So if
Interesting.
we're just even thinking about these numbers, 1 to 3 months to adapt to something that is new, um, just for one thing, right? Imagine how difficult and overwhelming it can be if we have more than one part of our life, more than one significant dimension of our life be changed simultaneously. And that's essentially what happened with the pandemic. Is the pandemic impacted our personal life, it impacted our professional lives, it impacted our community, the way we interacted with our community. So what I would say is part of managing change, right, is also managing how much change you bring into your life. And I always tell my clients, if you can avoid multiple disruptions at the same time, avoid it. Right. And that's not to say, we don't have the capacity to manage multiple disruptions, but it really does mean that there's only so much we can process and adapt to in a way that doesn't shake us too much. So that's what I would say is part of anxiety management is also understanding change. And part of managing anxiety is managing the frequency of disruptions in your life so that you can integrate the different components that are changing to a routine that you have already established.
When you spoke about disruptions, and I think you're absolutely right that the word disruption kind of has a negative connotation to it. But when you were talking about good disruptions, that really spoke to me because I definitely experienced a lot of anxiety after the birth of my son. It was a huge, shift in just role for myself as a new role as a mom, and then kind of keeping my old identity as a judo player and as a judo instructor, a worker. So integrating that into my new life was definitely challenging. So I think it really spoke to me when you spoke about not all disruptions are necessarily bad. I mean, getting married is a great thing, or moving in with somebody can be an exciting time, but that these disruptions can cause anxiety, even though they might be something that you decide to do for yourself. I was curious to know about your personal experience just as a therapist dealing with anxiety through the pandemic. Um, how has it affected your role as a therapist? And how have you managed that for yourself personally?
That's a fantastic question, Sayaka. And I think what that reminds me is a conversation I had years ago with one of my mentors. And I, had a disruption. I had multiple disruptions happening in my life. And she really brought me back, right, to the human element. And, I was in a way trying to explain to her, I don't understand why I feel anxious, right? It's like I have all these skills, I have all these tools. I knew this was going to happen. I planned for it. And she said, yeah, Daria, you are a therapist and the skills do help, but you're human first. Um, you're human first. And that really spoke to me because it does say something about our human capacity. And I do believe that, everyone has a different capacity. Everyone has a different way of relating with change. Everyone has a different way of processing information. Something that might be challenging to a person might take them one day to process, right? And then feel clear and can move forward. For some people, it takes weeks to process it. And knowing yourself is important, having a sense of awareness of your own patterns and ways that you process emotions are important. But then again, sometimes we don't know until we're in the situation. And so what I would say is being very proactive about setting yourself up for success if you are anticipating change is very important. That's something that I emphasize as a therapist. When individuals come to me and they say, I'm getting married, I'm moving, I'm going to have a child, I'm super excited about this job, I often encourage them to put stepping stones to anchor themselves around something. Right? So one example would be, okay, great, you're getting a new job, you're moving in with your spouse. Is the neighborhood, at least that you're going to be staying in, is that somewhat familiar? Is that somewhat similar? And if so, and if not, let's just emphasize the more if not part, right? If not, can you proactively make decisions to create a rhythm that is going to feel comfortable, right? Can you go out into your community and find where the movie theater is if you are someone who loves to watch movies at the end of every week? Can you put on your calendar time blocks to reach out to a friend and speak on the phone in the same way that you used to, right? And so surrounding yourself with a rhythm that is familiar can be very helpful when it comes to managing the things that are not familiar. And I really appreciate also the personal part that you invited, because I recently, personally, on a personal level, went through many changes. I've been in the Bay Area for 20 years. I'm still in the Bay Area, but I moved from one city to another city. It's only 1 hour apart. And I thought no big deal, right? I have a certain rhythm, I have a work rhythm. But guess what? It was disruptive. It changed how frequently I would see my family members. It changed which friends I would interact more with. It changed just the community that now I'm a part of. And so while all of that was good disruption, while all of that was something that I wanted, it also meant I had to figure out a way before the move happened to mentally imagine, okay, what does this new life look like? What is this new life going to ask of me? What are the main components of my life that are important, that I want to really pay attention to and invest in? And so, if in my previous rhythm, part of my week looked like hanging out with friends at the end of every week, I had to find a way to reestablish that rhythm in a new community. So I give that example. It's my example, but it's an example that I think many of us can relate with. Is part of managing change is also knowing kind of life you appreciate, and then trying to be proactive about recreating that in a new space, so that you still feel aligned with some of your values and one of your goals.
I think those are excellent tips and suggestions, and some of them are ones that I've never heard of. So avoiding multiple disruptions if you can help it. Sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes life happens. Um, Giving yourself time to change. That was fascinating that you said intrinsic changes generally take 1 to 4 months, where extrinsic changes may take a little bit longer. Um, as a new mom, every day felt like 10 years, but when you look back, time went by really quickly. And I think that's, a main message is that just because you feel the way you do now doesn't necessarily mean you're going to feel that way even tomorrow or a week from that day. And then the idea of creating structures in place and being proactive and thinking about how different experiences will affect your new life. I think that's really powerful. Just having an idea of what's important to you and making time for things like that, yeah, is a really powerful idea. But I think one of the main things that I took away from what you said is about being human first, that you could do all these things and know all these things and do everything right, which is what I did when I was pregnant. I tried to do everything right. But sometimes things happen and you feel anxious. It's okay. You're human. Everybody feels certain ways. So, um, those are really great tips, and really appreciate that conversation about anxiety. If you have anything you'd like to close out for this section.
Thank you. That's just a wonderful reflection. I really appreciate the way you've taken in all of that and brought it back to the conversation. I think what I will also just emphasize, going off of what you said, right, between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, is often when we are in this very exciting new beginning part of our lives, because it's exciting, because we're full of such happy hormones and enthusiasm, we assume that that's just going to be how it is. We assume we're going to feel that happy hormone, right, for a while. And we do, perhaps for a couple weeks or a month, and then the reality hits, the reality of, oh, this is different. And so I think just even psychologically being able to see that and validate that, uh, when that emotional shift happens. Oh, I'm not feeling as excited as I used to. That's okay. Oftentimes that's just, it is how it's supposed to be. It's normal. Um, the emotional shifts that we have does not necessarily signify that we're on the wrong path. Now, of course, there are nuances and details to that that can be explored given your particular circumstance. But if you are doing something that is exciting and you're ultimately aligned with, and then you're still having those mixed emotions, it's just important to be able to label those and understand and be curious about what part of the change process am I in right now, and give yourself a little bit of grace. I think we are our worst persecutors in the sense that, we hold ourselves to a very high standard and often forget to give ourselves the same level of grace and reassurance that we tend to give to our friends and our family members. So I also think it's so, so important when you're managing change to have some self-empathy and be connected to your special person, be connected to your friends, reach out to professionals and have those conversations, especially when you're going through a challenging time. Which is also the irony, is oftentimes people say, right, oh, I'm too stressed, I don't want to talk to anyone, or I'm too overwhelmed, or I don't feel good, or I don't look good. And I think, well, that's precisely when we need to be connected. That's precisely when we need to reach. Um, so I think that's something that's very important to put out there. I do think if you can avoid multiple disruptions, and that word "if" is significant because, yeah, we sometimes we don't have control. Sometimes we do need to accept that next promotion. Sometimes that coincides with the month that we get married. Sometimes that coincides with the month that we move. There are things that you may not have control over. If that is the case, and you are aware that that is the case, can you still be proactive? Can you still take some time at the end of every week and ask yourself, what are the structures I should place ahead of time so I can feel somewhat anchored, and so I can have some sense of predictability on what my new life is going to look like as I integrate all of this? And if you can avoid it, right? Just take one change and then take the next 3, 4 months integrating that and settling into that, and then bring in another change if that needs to happen. Um, and the last thing I would just emphasize is check in with yourself. Um, Oftentimes, it's so easy for us to get motivated and inspired by ideas, by insights that we tap into, almost like a New Year resolution, and we commit ourselves, but then we forget to check in with our own selves. How am I doing? How am I doing in this new reality that I've set myself up for? And that can be checking in with your friends, but sometimes just keeping track through a journal entry, making lists at the end of the week to ask yourself, how you're feeling grounded in your new world, and what kind of changes that you need to make in order to feel more anchored.
Well, those are fantastic tips, and I think our audience will definitely enjoy those. And appreciate this conversation about anxiety, and look forward to our next conversation where we dive a little bit deeper into the work that you do and your passion. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sayaka. It's a pleasure being here, and always pleasure to connect with you.